Well, everybody, welcome to the conversation. I have the joy of being here with our dear friends Tony and Jenn. So, you guys, thanks for doing this with us.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, it's really sweet. So we've known each other for what is it, 12 years?
I think somewhere between 10,
Okay.
more than 10,
Right.
probably just under 12.
Yeah, and then Kirsten and I, we've known you obviously our entire marriage. So we're excited to do this with you. We think you guys are incredible people. So it's fun to get to hear some of your story. So for folks that don't know you obviously yet, why don't you just tell us a little bit about where you come from and a little bit about your backgrounds?
Okay.
I'll go first.
Yes, you go first.
All right. So, I'm Korean American. I was born in Los Angeles, and I basically lived in Los Angeles all my life until I got married. But yeah, that's a pretty boring story.
But it's got so much flavor to it. You say Korean, and there's a lot involved in that.
Yeah, we'll definitely get there. Yeah, I'm curious to hear.
So I'm Cuban Korean. My daddy's Cuban. My mom is Korean. They met when he was in the military stationed over in Korea. So while I was growing up, I had a chance to live in Korea for a couple of years. Grew up in Arizona. So while I embraced my Latino roots and I embraced my Asian roots, I also have a huge passion for the indigenous nation because Arizona is a huge population of Native Americans. It's multicultural asset.
So so Jenn, with your, and then Tony, we'll get to you being Korean American. So Jenn, for you having both Cuban, right, and Korean, how does that mark you, or what has that been like having both cultural backgrounds? Like, how has that kind of formed you as a person?
I think in the very beginning, so when I grew up in Arizona, I grew up in a very small city, very small, and grew up seeing basically just white people around me, especially because it's a small city and we're on the army base, and so I thought I was white when I was growing up. I'll be honest with you.
Just because you were surrounded by mostly white people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it's not like I had anybody like teaching me like, oh, you're Korean, you're Cuban. It's just you're Jenn, and there was no heritage that was like taught into my life. It wasn't until my parents divorced when I was 9 and my mom and I moved out to California, that it was the first time like I felt like God like stripped this veil off of my eyes, and I saw people with like my skin color, my dark features of like dark eyes and dark hair. Like it was the first time I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not white. Like I have people I look like, and I grew up in Los Angeles, so I grew up in a neighborhood with predominantly Latinos in the area, and so I grew up thinking, I grew up with my mom who's Korean, but I also grew up thinking I was more Hispanic than anything because I just melded in with that culture, just ethnically the way I looked a lot more. But then there was a piece of me that was wanting to become closer to my mom, and so I dived into learning the Korean language and the Korean dance and history and all that. So a lot of my life was spent trying to like balance myself out, like, oh, I feel a little too Asian right now, balance it out.
Oh, wow.
I feel a little too Latino right now, balance it out. And it wasn't until God was just really maturing me where he was saying like, no, you are whole.
Yeah.
You're not just a part this and a part that. You are wholly my child, with just these different attributes that I've given you. It's just different creativity I majored into me.
So what was that like? Okay, so that moment when you were 9, like you said, when you sort of, the revelation opened up for you and you kind of began to see your own, like who God uniquely made you to be. What was that like? Was that especially at 9 years old, what was that like realizing, oh man, I'm not necessarily who, not even I thought I was, but just I'm noticing things about myself differently now?
Yeah. I think I felt comfortable for once.
Yeah.
It's because I didn't feel like I stood out. I felt like I blended in with my surroundings, and I felt welcomed until I started getting a little bit older and realized, when you get older, your eyes just become a little bit more aware of racial issues. And it was about like beginning years of high school You know, I had this sense of pride of my heritage. And then when I was hanging around certain groups of people, I started realizing there was some racial tension going on. And so while I felt good and in my own skin finally, I also felt like there are some real injustices out there, and my presence is causing a lot of discomfort. So I'd like, for example, like walk into a store and, you know, I'd walk into a Korean store and I'd have Korean friends around me who are 100% Korean, so you could tell ethnically they're Korean.
Right.
And then they'd see me and they would follow me around the store as if like I was going to steal. And they wouldn't follow my friends around, you know? So little things like that, and it's not so little, but at the moment I was just like, what's going on?
Right.
And it was my mom who brought me to that sense of awareness, like, you know, it's the racial discrimination.
Wow.
You know, and like there was a time when we went to a Korean restaurant and my mom got into an argument with this gentleman. He's not a gentleman. And he looked at me and he looked at my mom and he started saying, you know, you whore, you know. And he was referring to like just the whole history of comfort women and saying, well, you have like a bastard of a child there and who are you to talk and this and that. So, you know, it's interesting, like coming out to Los Angeles where it's just this ethnic diversity, you're thinking like, oh, finally feel at home, finally feel welcomed, you feel like, you know, you're with your people, you know, whether it's Latino or whether it's Asian, and then you start realizing, oh no, there's some dirt under there, there's some real issues, you know. So there's just, it was just a time of me understanding, okay, life is not so pleasant. Yeah. You know, being from two different heritage.
Goodness. Tony, what about for you? What it's like just growing up being Korean American?
Well, up until like third grade, I was at a school with predominantly Hispanic kids. Okay. I would probably say like 90% of the school was Hispanic. I don't remember this, but my mom told me that I would come home almost every day beat up because on my way home, I would walk home. And it's a pretty close walk, but kids would like pick on me. And you know, back at the time, I didn't think it was because of my, you know, I didn't know race. I didn't know why they were picking on me, but they were just picking on me. In fourth grade, I moved to another school, and it was very diverse. So I had different friends. I had Black, Filipino, Korean, white, Hispanic. I had multicultural friends. In middle school, that kind of dwindled away. Some of them kind of dropped out of the group. And then in high school, the few that were with me in middle school kind of still hung out, but they kind of dropped out too. And so I was just left with the Korean American friends, and then some friends from Korea who just came from Korea. So we just formed a clique of just Korean speaking friends. In high school, that's basically what happened. All the people just started separating into their own races. I honestly don't know why. And there was a lot of tension, just like her in high school. There was even tension between the Korean Americans and the Koreans that just came from Korea. There was almost a big old brawl between the groups. A few of us that were overlapped, like me, we kind of went in the middle and said, you know, we gotta stop this. We can't fight like this. And so we would see the tension there. But yeah, it's just been teased all my life about my eyes, about my cultural background, just because I grew up in an area where they weren't used to seeing.
Right. Can you describe what was the tension between, like you said, Koreans who just came from Korea and Korean Americans? What was the tension there?
They don't understand each other. Koreans from Korea, they learn respect in Korea, respect your older, cultural things that they find certain things disrespectful. And then you have the Korean Americans who grew up in America, born and raised in America. So yes, they understand some of the culture because of their parents, but most of the culture, they just kind of, it's not enforced. And so some of the things that we do as Korean Americans are found as disrespectful to those who just came from Korea. And so it's just a misunderstanding of culture. And you know, they wouldn't have a fight with Americans because they're expecting an American. different culture.
Got
But when you see somebody who looks like you not acting like you, it's like, okay, what's going on here?
So it's almost like reverse culture shock on their end. They're expecting you to act just like they do as Koreans. So let me ask you this: like, even you mentioned the generational tension, I guess, between maybe first generation, even second generation. For both of you, was there ever conversations along the way, even with your own parents? Now, were both of your parents born in the States, or were they born?
My parents were born in Korea.
Okay.
They moved to America about a year before I was born.
Okay. And then what about for you, Jen? Were you folks from here?
So my mom was born in Korea. My daddy was born in Cuba.
Okay.
He left during the Cuban Revolution.
Oh,
And they came to the
okay.
United States
Got it.
and joined the military and got stationed to Korea and met her there.
Oh, okay. So even for both of you, were there conversations, even you growing up with parents from a different country, you growing up in this country? What was that like? Were there ever conversations or tensions along the way, even just trying to understand your parents, or maybe your parents trying to understand you growing up in America, maybe even different? Because you mentioned, like, Tony, the Koreans coming here, there's a cultural gap, right? They're expecting something different. So was that ever a conversation along the way?
I think that's probably more your topic. My mom was very liberal, and so
Okay.
was my grandma, my Korean grandma. She's the one who hooked up my mom and daddy together. So
Oh,
she was like way
Okay.
ahead of her time.
Okay,
So
okay.
I didn't
Wow.
really have like this like traditional pool in my family.
Okay.
For our family, it was a lot more of just, this is our history, these are some of the beauties of our culture, these were some traditions, nothing that's mandated over you.
Okay.
He has a totally different experience though.
My parents are very traditional, much less so now than when I was younger, but I would hear things here and there. For example, my Korean American will call my house, a Korean American friend will call my house, and he doesn't speak Korean at all, just basic words. And he would call and say, "Oh, it's Tony there," and then my dad would chew him out. He would chew my friend out, embarrassing me, saying, "You're supposed to say hi to me first. You're supposed to state your name, and then you're supposed to ask if he's here." You know,
Oh,
so
interesting.
little things like that. Little things like having my hands in my pocket when I bow.
You're not supposed to have your hands in your
it's
pocket.
disrespectful.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Just little things here and there. I'm like, this is not Korea. I mean, this is. I respected them. I respected their background, and I tried to accommodate for their upbringing.
Right.
And so, you know, I respect my parents, and so I don't want them to think that I disrespect them in any way. So I would just follow along with what they wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, let me ask you this then. If that was the sort of dynamic between your folks and yourself, even now you raising your own boys with all of that background, that cultural heritage, how does who you are play into even raising your boys? Like, what do you want for them in knowing where they come from?
It's a daily battle. That whole demand for respect, I need to fight that. It's you know, it's like, because it's been ingrained in me how you're supposed to treat your father, how you're supposed to treat your mother. It's ingrained in me, and to see our boys not doing it, it just kind of nags at me like, but you did it. You were supposed to do it. They're supposed to do it too.
Okay.
And so sometimes it nags at me.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I'll get frustrated because I'm expecting a certain amount of respect,
Okay.
cultural. And once I realize that, I back off. You know? But
So that would be almost similar to your folks. Like you said, they were expecting something of you, and now you have to fight that same.
exactly, because that's how I was brought up.
Right.
So, you know, I especially the first 5 to 7 years, it was really hard trying to adapt to parenting because I've never seen parenting done otherwise. So,
Okay. Yeah.
and you know, my parents are great parents, and so. You know, I've always known that they love me,
Yeah.
and I've always known that they would do anything for me.
Right.
But there are certain aspects that the Korean culture that I don't necessarily believe. So, but when you've seen it all your life, it's kind of hard to break that.
Now, even for your marriage, like you said, obviously Jen with you being Korean, but also Cuban, coming from those different cultural backgrounds coming together in marriage, how has that played into even just your marriage? Have there been joys in that, tensions in that? What's it like even just to marry someone from a different background than maybe even yourself?
It's been more difficult for her, so I'll let her talk.
When we were dating, I think I lost a little bit of who I was because I tried to present myself as more Korean in front of his parents.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And that was really hard for me, especially because I was estranged from my daddy for so long that for me to connect with the Cuban side meant so much because it meant bringing back memories of him. So for me to deny that part of myself, almost like put him and everything he brought into my life like into a little corner, like in embarrassment.
Okay,
and I didn't want that. Prior to Tony, I dated a Korean guy who only spoke Korean, and so we spoke only in Korean to each other. And it was the time my best friends tell me was the most embarrassing time of my life because I kind of completely turned into this Korean girl. You know, I was listening to Korean music, speaking only Korean, dating a guy who, you know, was full-blown Korean. And after I sensed that God was like, you need to, you know, cut that relationship out, I had this strong sense of no more will I, you know, be ashamed of the other side of myself.
Right.
Like I wanted to embrace everything. And then when I met him, it was going back into that like, okay, don't show your Cuban side too much, don't show that Latino side too much. And
you weren't going to marry a Korean.
I wasn't going to marry a Korean. A Korean was on the bottom of my list of
And Tony showed up.
And Tony showed up. God showed up. And God said, like, it's not in your hands. And my mom didn't want me to marry a Korean, you know.
No, how come?
It was her own form of racism. You know, she came into this country and she and my other family members from Korea who came into this country, they were kind of blinded by the sense of, oh, being white means being on the better side.
So was it almost like a shame? Like they didn't want you to actually carry on to the Korean heritage?
So like I said, like the heritage was very important for my mom's side of the family, especially because my mom was a Korean dancer. So she was very highly involved in, and even now, that's what she does for a living. She still does the Korean dancing, the Korean drumming, and her job at the nursing home, she works at a nursing home, and she's the cultural liaison. She's the one that brings in all the Korean athletes. So she was never against Korean, the heritage and culture, but her mindset was, if you're white, then you're privileged. And
I see. So she wanted something she wanted that for you.
Yes, and
I also think it's because of the way a lot of Korean men treat their wives.
I'm not sure if she saw any of that because she didn't grow up with her dad. It was only my grandma, and then my daddy, who's Cuban, he came from a background of fleeing the Cuban Revolution, and there was a time in history where America was their hero of any Cuban refugees.
Okay, got it.
You know, so both my parents were like, you know, American, the best, you know, kind of a thing. So there was nothing, no time while I was growing up where like the heritage part was ever like put on the side. Now I lost my train of thought. But going back to like the hardship, when I came time to try to embrace like both sides, and I met his family, I realized they didn't want him to marry somebody that was biracial, and so that became a huge problem for us. And it was a huge problem not only for them but even for him, because not that he didn't appreciate that side of me, but he wasn't used to somebody that was so non-traditional. I didn't grow up with any of those traditions. I grew up learning that those were traditions and this is the heritage, but you don't have to embrace that. And you know, like my grandma never wanted women to be in the kitchen serving men. That was never something she ever believed in either, just because she was Korean. She never lived like that, you know? So my mom didn't live that way, and she didn't have it for me. Whereas he comes from a background, and he already sees it. He's like, oh no, like here's my girlfriend, and she doesn't embrace any of that, and here's my family who does. And his parents made it known during our relationship that they weren't happy about me being biracial.
So let me ask you this: like now, how many years have you guys been married now?
We're going on.
Tony, you better get it right.
14.
No, he's worried I won't get it right. I don't think this March will be 14. Yeah.
14. Okay, so let me ask you this then: if you can think back to when it first started, when you were first dating versus now, what was it like, Tony, for you, realizing Jen was coming in with a very different background than maybe you were even expecting? And then Jen, what was it like for you when you realized, in a sense, I'm not going to be who's approved of necessarily? What was it like at the beginning? And then how have you traversed that over these last 14 years? Maybe start with what it was like when that you kind of both woke up to that, hey, this is our reality. This is what we're dealing with.
Well, we met in January of 97, and we got together in about October of 97. It took me 5-6 years before I was able to propose.
Oh, 7.
7 years. I was kind of going on the
Yeah.
estimating lower. It took me 7 years before I could propose to her. Mainly because I saw my family and Jen and her family. 2 totally different circles, with me being in the middle of this Venn diagram. They have nothing in common. And so I felt torn. I felt like almost literally being pulled in both directions.
Yeah.
And if I wanted to be a good boyfriend and a husband, I'll have to sacrifice my family of origin. And if I want to be a good son, a good brother, I would have to sacrifice being a good husband.
Jeez,
and so
that's heavy, man.
It was some painful times. And so it took me that long to be able to propose because I saw the battle ahead and I was not ready to fight it.
Yeah, like you knew what would be coming.
Yeah. And so, so I pushed it off as long as I could, and then I was like, I can't wait any longer. I'm just gonna have to jump into the pool, It doesn't matter how cold that water is. I'm just gonna have to jump in.
Yeah. Wow. Jen, what about for you? What was that first season like, knowing what you were in for?
I don't know how I really felt. I knew I was just so in love with this man and everything was going to be worth it.
There were times when she regretted.
Yeah, but it's really hard to say, like, because our background in our relationship, like after we broke up, like we didn't get together until 4 years later. We were still best friends, and I knew God wanted us together, and it was a desire of my heart. So I committed myself to praying for him for 3 additional years, and I fasted every week, saying, Lord, this is my heart's desire. So that kind of trumped, because we were separated, kind of trumped the deeper issues of racism and like how that seemed so trivial at the time, because it was more a matter of, this is who I know you want me to be with, Lord.
Right.
So, but for him it was at the forefront of his mind, and I get it, because he's the one that's going to have to like deal with his parents.
Yeah.
But for me, it's like, this is who I am. I can't change it. You know what I mean? So it's either we push through and I'm accepted or not. But I knew this is what God had for us. So yeah, it seemed really trivial at the moment. And they had a really hard time with the fact that he had proposed to me, and that's actually when a lot of it came out of like this. What I knew was their dislike of my heritage actually vocally was expressed.
Yeah, my parents, I never knew, because they treated everyone well, so I never knew the inner thoughts of them.
Okay.
And So they treat everybody well and liked everybody and talked with everyone, but it took my dad some alcohol in order for him to verbalize the fact that he was unpleased with the biracial aspect. So it's something he's ashamed of, but it's something he felt.
Yeah.
So it's kind of something that I already knew deep down, that was one of the things that.
Yeah.
So it's like, it was rough.
Yeah, just dealing with that as you went along.
Yeah.
But that was like the beginning part. I think when it came down to like the nuts and bolts of the wedding, and like that was when I had my first panic attack, was getting ready for the wedding, because all the traditional elements that I would have never ever considered, because it's just not a part of my side of the family.
Right.
Traditions to follow anymore. Like his family was still following these old school traditions that are embedded in the Korean culture. And like he's I'm Korean American, like I don't follow that. And here I'm like, shoot, I'm not, if you're Korean American, I'm like, you're on the other side. So it wasn't something that fitted over us, but it was, that responsibility was placed upon us. So now I'm accepted, so I it is what it is, but now here are the traditional values that you guys are going to have to follow. And that was probably when the biggest fights occurred.
Yeah. And it kind of bothered me because some of the things she didn't even know, her friends were telling her.
He's talking about his mom,
So it's like, you didn't even know about this a week ago. It's like, why is this important now? It's
interesting. Okay.
And so, for them, it's okay. So this is culture. This is how everybody does it. I'm like, yeah, but you didn't know that.
Yeah.
So it just bothered me. It was a tough year. We were engaged for a year, and that was a tough year.
Yeah, and then once we had kids, then it became like, okay, these are traditions you need to follow. With kids, and teach your kids,
right?
Because they need to carry it on, kind of thing. So it was a huge battle trying to like balance out. Well, what is our culture? And actually, that's something Marianne walked us through. It's like, well, what's your culture,
right?
Not what's their culture, because now it's you guys and your family, and what are you guys wanting your family to look like, and what culture is it that you want your kids to carry on, and we needed somebody to sit with us and really have that conversation with us, because it was about, well, what's American, what's Korean, what's Cuban, what's biblical, where does the Bible even come into play in all of this? Because some of the cultural things actually are unbiblical, but yet it was being followed because, well, it's the culture. So it was just, we were left in like this whirlwind of confusion.
So let me ask you this, and for those that don't know, Marianne is someone who's pastored you two, pastored Kirsten and I for years. I know we all owe her a lot, right? So let me ask you this, knowing kind of the way that Marianne hears from the Lord and prophetically walks out, just speaking into our lives, during that season for you, as you were wrestling for the first time with, okay, what's biblical, what's Korean, what's Cuban, and what from both of those cultures looks like Jesus? Maybe what are the things that aren't so much the kingdom way of doing things? What do you feel like the Spirit of God was revealing to you, and maybe even still, about how you distinguish those? So what are the parts of Korean culture and Cuban culture that you say, man, this is so kingdom, we love this is what we want our boys growing up with? And then what are the parts that you realize, I don't know, this is so much like Jesus, so much. Yeah. What were some of those things along the way for you?
The main thing for me was in the Korean culture, the firstborn son is supposed to take the parents in, and the parents live with the firstborn son. And I'm the one and only son, and so it was my job, my role to live with my parents, and they were expecting us to move in with them, and so that clashes with the Bible, where the Bible says you meet a wife, get married, and you meet a woman, get married, and leave your parents. And I was thinking, oh, that's all cultural and stuff. It's a Jewish culture. This is Korean culture. So I thought, before I met Jenn, I was thinking, okay, so I'll live with my parents. But I came to realize that under my father's household, I could never become a man. So he will always be the man of the house, and he's not a type of person to step down and lift me up.
Okay.
And he lifts me up. He's very encouraging and stuff. But as far as the role, he will always be my father. And so I realized after getting married that I would never be able to be the man of the house with them under the roof.
And I'd like to add to that because it kind of brought into my mind a conversation his cousin asked me, his cousin who doesn't believe in God. So like, how does that work? I mean, you know, he knows that I'm not traditional as far as a women's role. And he's like, but yet, you know, Christianity talks about being a man of the house, you know. And so I was telling him, well, you know, all Christians believe in different things. I was like, but, you know, our theology is that Jesus represents how the husband should be, which is to serve, you know, which is a much harder role.
Yeah.
You know, he would never have been able to serve under his mom and dad's house while living there, because in the Korean tradition, you do not serve your wife.
Oh, okay.
You are to be served.
My mom kicked me out of the kitchen when she saw me doing the dishes.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So when we were first married, the first few years, she would get upset that he would come into the kitchen and help me, you know, do the dishes.
Right.
You know, she would start putting two and two together, like, oh, my son does this all the time for his wife. Like,
oh, wow.
You know, and so it brought out a whole lot of tension, but we realized like that's the clash between who Jesus is and this whole cultural value. It's that, you know, we're told to serve.
Yeah.
When I first got married, and we would visit my parents, I would purposely sit on the sofa and watch TV, all the while Jen's in the kitchen washing the dishes, and I would tell myself I need to plant myself here if I want to keep peace. And so I would sit there knowing that she's washing the dishes. I'm like, I want to go help, but I'm just going to sit here.
Because you knew if you went into the kitchen and helped with the dishes, that would cause more problems.
Yeah.
Okay.
But now after many years of being married, and many years of my parents seeing our relationship and what we bring to the table, now it's like she's telling my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, she's telling my brother-in-law, look, he's doing the dishes. What you doing? You know, so it's like, so the roles have kind of and also my dad started helping out a lot because my mom's has arthritis, and so my dad started doing some cooking and cleaning and dishes and stuff, and so they've grown in their thought process as well. So
when you think about those things, when you think again the kingdom culture versus any of the other cultures, when you think about raising your boys, what are the parts of both maybe Cuban and Korean culture that you think, we love this and this looks so much like Jesus, we really want our boys to know this is a lot of where we come from, and like what are the things you want to instill in them culturally that do align with who Jesus is and the things that he calls us to? Are there certain things that come to mind?
The first thing that comes to mind is respect. There is a lot of respect, actually in my opinion too much respect. You know, in the Korean culture you respect even though they don't deserve it. And so I think that kind of to a certain degree is biblical in that you respect those around you. The Roman centurion, if they ask you to walk a mile, you're going to walk two. Why? Because it's respectful. It's something that you should do. And so the respect aspect, you know, lower yourself in order to show that respect to others. I think that's something that I want to impart on the kids, so that they can respect people even if they don't deserve it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure if my thought process is aligning with your question, but like what comes to my mind is, you know, the Cuban and Korean, they're almost complete opposites in the beauties that I see in them, and I've unfortunately through my mom I've seen so much beauty out of the Korean culture, but through his side I've seen it's just so much heartache. Like there's so many times I wanted to disassociate with myself with the Korean culture because there's just too much pain of what I've seen. It's only when my mom is in that picture that I'm like, oh yes, these are the beautiful aspects, you know, of you know, the Korean culture and Cuban just as a whole, the whole Latino culture of just the freedom to just be who you are. Like that's something you'll find in Latino communities.
Yeah.
You won't find in the Korean community.
It's a facade.
It's just they're polar opposites. So, you know, when I look at the boys, you know, and think about like what kind of kingdom life I want them to live. I want them to live knowing that they were created for a purpose and to embrace that and to love that. You know,
Yeah.
whereas like for many Koreans, if you speak to them, there's just a lot of they critique themselves so much. You know, like their intellect, the way they look, you know, the things they do, everything is about
It's a show.
a show. You know, there's just a lot of pride embedded in there of being a certain way, and that makes me grateful that I have the other aspect to say, like, you know, just because that's rooted in a lot of our traditions doesn't make it right.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then, you know, I reflect upon the Latino culture, and I'm like, you know, this is life right here. You know, not that you won't see negative sides to every culture, but like I kind of have to like pick and choose like which one does represent kingdom life. You know, and then within the Korean community also, like you said, like the respect aspect. Okay, there's some kingdom life there.
Right.
But for me, it's a little harder to reach into that Korean culture and see like what are the you know, the parts of it that bring that kingdom life. I still have a lot of things lingering from the past that just reminds me of just.
Well, they're hard for prayer.
Yes. Oh gosh.
Tell me more about that.
Well, you know it.
Yeah.
So.
I'll hear from you guys.
Yeah. So.
They pray with passion. We've been in Korean churches because our parents speak Korean, so we've seen all sorts. We grew up in Korean churches. Well, towards the latter part, right?
Yeah, my teenage years.
Probably about a good 20 years in Korean churches, something like that. By the way, we would see different ministries, different churches. They all pray with passion. It's like they're praying fervently. They would wake up like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning to go to church so that they could have daily prayer.
Yeah, that is something that I'd like to instill in the kids is to and we don't have that unless we were to actually take our kids to a Korean church. Like you will not find it unless you. There are some other cultural ethnic churches out there who pray in a very similar manner, but we have yet to see that.
Oh no, wait.
Oh, what were you saying?
Is it right?
Oh, just right. Sorry. Yeah.
So the Korean churches, it was like he said, it'd be daily 4 o'clock in the morning. Come to church for morning prayer. And get down on your knees and wail before God. You are wailing, and it's interesting. Like you think about, you know, I was talking about how you know they kind of criticize the things that they say and do, the way they look and stuff. But when it comes to like prayer,
they just drop it all down.
You just come as you are, and you are just bawling before the Lord, and. I've always, and I don't know if this is true, but I've always seen it just coming from almost a shamanistic culture that was rooted in Korea a long time ago, where it was, and my mom says there's a word for it in Korean, and it's like when you see Koreans crying, it's a cry that comes from like deep down inside.
Okay.
And
it reminds me of the Jewish culture, where they have sackcloth and themselves. It just reminds me a lot of that.
Yeah, and so there's like a word for it, and it's just this deep emotional crying that you like bear out on the surface, and you'll see it at Korean funerals, except for those who are assimilating a little bit more to the Western style funerals. But it's that like you're beating your fist over your chest, and you can't contain yourself, and that kind of prayer is something that we wouldn't find anywhere else.
What do you think it is about then so what is it about sort of the Korean understanding then of who God is that would lead them towards prayer that fervently? Like you said, it's not something we may see in our culture here, what do Koreans understand about God that leads them to that kind of commitment to prayer?
No, it's kind of oxymoronic. Is they're a very proud people. They have so much pride, too much pride. Is a flaw. But yet, on the flip side, the humility that they have is something that God brings. It's not something that we could design. How could you get a culture that has so much pride get on their knees and wail and beg for God to do something?
Wow.
So
yeah.
it's I say humility is a gift.
But I think, and this is some of the problems that we've seen is that sometimes, and I think a lot of it is because it comes from shamanism and Buddhism, the culture. Like people don't realize it's embedded in shamanism and Buddhism, but just the cultural parts that get built into Christianity. What I think God is seen more like God versus God is my friend.
So like a reverence for God. Okay.
That reverence, because I mean, even the way you dress at church, what you'll find Korean adults saying all the time is, well, you wouldn't want to go dress like that to meet the President of the United States.
Oh, interesting.
That is always this cliche that they say.
Right.
And it's
I grew up with that.
right? But it's like, well, God isn't anything like the President of the United States.
They wear a suit and tie.
Yeah.
They 4 o'clock in the morning, suit and tie, dress, come to church for morning service, on their knees, so it's like there is this sense of like, you are God Almighty, and I can't even approach you, kind of thing. But yet it again, that's why I think it's embedded in, just other religions, because we've seen that sometimes they've missed the mark of the intimacy that comes with who Jesus is, who is our best friend, who is someone we can go to no matter what we look like, or,
Yeah, my parents got on my case for coming to church with slippers.
I was going to say, because you're usually rocking gym shorts, dude. So that, okay.
Basketball shorts and a t-shirt.
Yeah.
His church, before, they would get mad at him for coming to church like that.
Yeah.
The church didn't get mad.
Some people
got mad. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, Jen, on your side, because obviously, when you think about Korean culture, you've mentioned a couple times, even as you shared, obviously you having Cuban and Korean, and you mentioned there could be polar opposites in a lot of ways. But then you also mentioned, obviously, on your Cuban side, you have the connection to your dad, right? It's that side. What's that been like then over the years? Because obviously you married a Korean, right? Your mom is Korean. So it sounds like the connection to Korean culture is just so much more in your face, I guess.
It is.
I don't know if easier to connect with. So what's it been like over the years, kind of trying to connect with who you are as a Cuban as well? What's that been like over the years for you?
It's, I shouldn't, I almost feel embarrassed to say this out loud, but I felt like this is so unfair. Like there's this whole other side of me that God has created in me. Yeah. And I've missed it. And a lot of that has to just do with the relationship I've had with my daddy. But that's getting built up, and I'm learning about my heritage. And it's funny because my daddy will tell me, he's like, you're more Cuban than I am. But like I have to reflect on that, like what does that mean? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like what does Cuban even mean anymore, And he's talking about really just, he's got the history, that Cuban history in him, and then the nationality, like that makes him all Cuban. For me, because I was missing so much of that, I delved into not only the history, but the culture, the dance, the food, that part of the culture, and try to surround myself with that. Right. And actually when I got into college and I was trying to figure out what I want to do with my life, I remember thinking, I feel like the Korean side of me is just this much, weighing me down on the scale, that I went into Chicano Latino studies to balance it out. Yeah.
Because you wanted to know. That side of you.
She minored in it.
Yeah, I minored in it. If I would have majored in it, but whole different story. So it was just one of those things where I wanted to make sure that, because and this really came about because when I was being discipled by this wonderful lady who I haven't seen in more than 20 years, but she discipled me, and she was just this on fire woman for God who used to go and speak to just hundreds of people, going to all these different countries. She'd leave her husband home behind, he was like the youth pastor, and she'd just go out and and she was a Korean American lady, and she was discipling me through Shape, and she asked me one day, she said like, so like, who do you think you are? You know, like, you know, who did God make you to be? And I was trying to answer my question, and then she stopped me and she goes, no, Jen, you're Cuban Korean. And I was like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I was still in a Korean church at this time, and she's like, no, you don't get it. Like, God made you that for a reason. And she's like, you might not know what it is right now, but she's like, He made you that way for a reason. She's like, that is not something you find every day. And I was just like, oh. Like, that was the first time, like, I felt like somebody saw me.
Oh, wow.
And,
like, just by her using that language, calling that out in you. Okay.
And saying, embrace it, love it, including all the racism that comes with it, and all the social injustice, and all the beauty. She's like, take it in, you know. And that was right before college. And so in college, I decided to delve into it, and I started praying into it, like, Lord, why? You know, like, why did you bring these two different people together, you know, from two totally different cultures to, you know, create me, and why have you made me so cognizant of that? Because I've met people who are biracial, and it doesn't matter to them. They call themselves American. And here I am all fascinated, like, you've got blank cultures in you, like, and aren't you, like, you know, curious? And they're like, well, I'm American. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's not me. That's not, like, yes, I'm American, but man, that is not, you know, she did something to me by saying that. It really empowered me and really made me just seek, like, Lord, what does that all mean? And so.
To set some background, she was estranged from her Cuban dad since 10. And still hasn't seen him, but she emails. So.
And has that just been a recent, like you mentioned was there an entire season from 10 on to whenever where there was no, if you don't mind, like no contact, or what was the?
So it was starting from age 9, and it wasn't until I was 29 that I got in contact with him. And
so for 20 years there was no contact. Interesting.
Yeah, so we knew a private investigator from one of the urban ministries we were a part of, and he, without me knowing, gave like my daddy's information to the private investigator and found him. Because I have been looking for him for years. And he found him, I wrote him a letter, and, you know, I'm like, I'm Jennifer Carolina Flores, I'm your daughter. And, you know, wasn't sure if he was going to write back, but he wrote back. And so ever since the age of 29, I'm 41 right now, so ever since then we've been in communication through email. We've had probably a span of like maybe 5 years here and there that we were disconnected because of miscommunication and stuff. So it's been like a whole new level of trying to get to know who I am.
Do you hope to get to meet him one day?
Oh yeah.
Yeah?
So desperately, yeah.
Wow. So let me ask you this, with that relationship with your dad and lack thereof for a number of those years, as you were discovering who you were as a Cuban and not being directly tied to your dad who you didn't know for so long, how has that played into it for you, that search for meaning or that search for identity?
She's learning a lot more for Cuban culture.
I think I probably learned more about
more within this past decade than ever.
I think I've learned more. I think I probably wouldn't have learned as much if I had him in my life. Because the whole reasoning for me searching that side of my life was to get some kind of reflection of him in me. And so I feel like, you know, because he and I would go back and forth with emails about like different music, and I tell him about all these different like Cuban artists or Latino musicians. He's like, I don't even know like who these people are, you know. And it's just like I soul searched for these things because it was just, it made me feel a little bit more complete.
Right.
Cuban food, she would look up recipes to make some Cuban dishes.
Because I grew up eating my grandma's Cuban dishes, and I was like, I didn't have it anymore, and so like I needed to like somehow bring it back into my life, and I told them, I was like, I want our kids to have that.
Right.
I was like, there in no way am I gonna have it so that it's just Korean.
Yeah.
In this household, when they have a whole other side. I've already, grown up feeling like that part of me was pushed away. And, other than that lady and my mom, who's always like embraced that part of me, like I want my kids to feel like they can embrace both sides also. So I was like, the only way I can do that is if I know enough about it. So, like we expose them to it, which is also like going back to before the recording, which is also why I kept my last name.
Yeah.
That was the only piece of like the heritage I had. And so
interesting. So that's why again, Tony, you'll go by Tony Chang, but you go by Jennifer Force because that's the Cuban.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're holding. Yeah.
So I was just like, I need it, and I want my kids to have it. I want to reflect it in them, and so yeah. But that becomes like this whole long story when we start mentioning the last names. We never go into it. Yeah.
Wow. Well, no, it's interesting too. That's why I was curious to hear. Just Kirsten and I raising our girls. We just realizing the way God's made us, just how much the thumbprint of a dad has on, especially a little girl, right? Yeah. Kids, period, right? You mentioned the impact, Tony, your dad had on you. And then, so it is interesting the search not only for a relationship with your dad, but that's also tied to who you are as a Cuban, right? So it's interesting that those are just so intertwined for you. And it's sort of like the search can never end, right?
Right.
You long for that. Now, let me ask you this, Jen. Early on when you were first talking, you used a phrase. I've obviously learned a lot of terms from you guys over the years, which I've so appreciated. You mentioned comfort women. I don't know that term. What is that referring to?
So it goes back to the time when the Japanese took over different Asian countries, not just Korea, but like China, Korea, let's say Vietnam, and then they would kidnap women and little girls and use them for the sport of the soldiers and troops.
Oh, interesting.
And so while that was from the Japanese side, that term kind of carried over for even some of the American soldiers that were on base in Korea and just getting some of the women for sport, and then soldiers would go back home, go back to America, and then the woman would be left with a biracial baby. And
interesting.
So when they see heifers, it's just...
So that's what you're saying early on, was that stigma sort of put on you? Like, did you wear that? So that was very much the thought?
Since she was growing up.
Well, since I was growing up here in LA, because nobody dared to do that before when my parents were married, because, he's in the military. But when we came over here, my mom and she, because my mom and I don't look alike. I mean, she's full-blown Korean, and then here's me. And when I was younger, a lot of people thought I was Mexican. So you see the two of us together. Yeah. And
so that's their assumption.
So and it's something that they would place upon her. So, but she can hold her own. She almost got into this fight with him. She's like, how dare you say that about my daughter? So, she was the one that defended me through like all the racial issues.
Now let me ask you this, like in your journeys, bringing all that background into it, over the years, just in your experience, just even in church life, right? Just doing kingdom ministry, being around folks for years. Jenn, you mentioned a couple times, I think you mentioned that the words like injustice or racism as part of what you've experienced in your story. In your church journey, has that ever played into just even your experience just in church life, just over the years? Is that something that's been there for you? Has it not? I know for some it might, for some it not. Has that ever been something even within the kingdom community you've had to wrestle with or walk through?
Well, like I said, I grew up in a Korean church since 6th grade. That's when my parents started going to church, because the adults couldn't speak English, so they had to have the service in Korean. So we would have an English ministry, like as a subgroup within that church. And there was even culture clashes between the young adult ministry, which was, they called it EM for English ministry, the English ministry and the KM, the Korean ministry. There was even a lot of clash between their cultural clashes. And then like we would go on mission trips with other churches, and then you have a band of Asians going on a mission, and we're in a McDonald's parking lot, and like somebody would drive up in a car, like 3 guys would drive up in a car and say, "Go back to your own country."
Yeah.
And I was thinking, I was born in LA.
Yeah.
So,
Jeez.
you know, it's
That was the reality.
Yeah.
because they saw a lot of Asians together, and you know, I mean, they might see that as racism too, but
No.
you know, we were just part of a church, Korean-speaking church, and
Right.
just so there was some aspects there, and then we moved on. We moved on to a Hispanic church. You know, and it was like in a
The urban areas, the urban ministry.
Okay.
and so I felt comfortable. I felt more comfortable there than in my Korean church.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's just kind of ironic. The same people group that beat me up as a kid, the same people group that teased me about my last name, the same people, you know, who would bully little kids just because they're Asian.
Yeah.
You know, even like one time in middle school, they were picking on this 7th grader. Like two Hispanic kids were picking on this 7th grader, and he was Korean. And I told them, I said, pick on somebody your own size. And so they started picking on me. So the same people group that was giving me so much hard time when I was younger, I was ministering to, and I felt comfortable doing so.
Yeah.
And more comfortable in that setting than in the Korean American church.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
What for you, Jen?
That was the time when I probably felt most at home out of all the ministries I think I've ever been in. And a lot of that has to do with just the culture. I mean, it's you know, you look at different Latino cultures and it's warm, it's inviting. You know, that's why even home gardens, you go out there and they're just so inviting.
Right.
You know, everything's about making you feel a part of the family. You are family, you know. Whereas, you know, we grew up in ministries, Korean ministries, where it's like, you have to do certain things to prove your worth, kind of, and have to have a certain status.
Yeah.
You know, and that becomes burdensome. I think, you know, out of the church and in the church. I think that when it comes to the way churches are these days, I'm becoming more aware of what kingdom life should look like. I'm still wrestling with a lot of it.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up in Arizona. I grew up in an all-white Baptist church. And that's where I became saved, you know. And as a teenager, I was in an all-Korean church where no one spoke English, except for a couple of the girls around me. They were all people who had just immigrated to America.
Okay.
So they all spoke Korean. And then, you know, now we're at the Vineyard, which is, we call it a white church. You know, I know we see
It was a culture shock.
Well, yeah, I bet.
A tall Asian, and I look around, and all I see is like blonde hair. I'm like,
Yeah.
I feel kind of out of place.
Yeah.
But I don't think it mattered, like, which of the settings we were in, but, like, I feel like God wants to break through a lot of the what do you call it? Like, I feel like a lot of eyes, you know, a lot of people's eyes and hearts are just covered up, and they don't want to see people for who they are. You know, I feel like it was and this is me stereotyping, but it was only at that urban ministry that we were at that I ever felt like you can be who you are. You know, you could be somebody who's homeless. You know, we had some homeless people who came there, and you could be dressed just, you know, with barely anything, you know, and really just, and the odor that comes from the body, it's okay, you're welcome in this ministry. Hey, you're Asian, you're welcome in this ministry. You're Mexican, you're welcome in this ministry. You know, like, it was probably the closest thing that we saw to what kingdom ministry should look like. And
the leaders were white. The leaders of that Hispanic ministry was white. So
So was it like when you mentioned, Jen, that it was the most kingdom in your mind? Was that the welcoming atmosphere? Is that what you would pinpoint, or what was it about that space?
Yeah,
it doesn't matter how you look.
And that's what I try to like reflect upon.
Yeah.
Every time I'm at different churches, because it was at that church that I felt like God gave me a vision of what kingdom ministry should look like, and I still have it like in my head of what it should look like, and it's glorious. It's so beautiful, but it's so heartbreaking because I don't see it.
What do you see though? Like, what do you envision?
Oh, it's a service room, and I can't see people's faces. All I see are people's backs, and just from people's backs, I could see all the different tribes and nations that are represented in there, and everyone praising God in one accord.
Right.
And I think that feeling of walking in to say, just like when I first came to California, and I was like, oh my gosh, there are people who look like me here. To be able to walk into a sanctuary and say, oh my goodness, I don't feel like an oddball, like he was saying, like I feel at home because I see a reflection of me everywhere. I think we're missing that, not just on the surface, but I mean, Jesus being represented. When we walk into a room, we're like, this is where we see Jesus, and so like I battle a lot because, as I'm watching the boys growing up, they're growing up as Americans. They're not growing up like, oh, what's the Korean side? Oh, what's the Cuban side? They're not going through that.
They're not even asking those questions.
They ask a little bit, but I went through it because I was literally missing that part of, I was searching, And for him, growing up in LA, he was surrounded by our kids. They're going to a school where, I mean, really,
they're being made fun of.
They're being made fun of. A lot of times, the younger ones have come home. They're like, they keep asking me, like, are you Chinese? Are you Japanese? Hey, Chinese boy, kind of thing. And I'm like, well, do you correct them? Because that's what you need to do. You need to educate them, because right now no one else is. So, you do it for them. And but it's heartbreaking because they're not seeing themselves represented around them. They're not seeing it at school. They're not seeing it at church. But it goes beyond the physical part. I feel like even at church, they don't see themselves represented just in their temperament, the temperament that comes with growing up in certain cultures. Like they don't see it, and so it's almost like, where do I belong? Yeah,
where do you fit?
Where do I fit? Because, it's kind of like I go back to what their pediatrician said years ago, and he's Asian, not by choice, it just happened to be he's Asian. And he's like, well, like a lot of Asian kids are very shy. They kind of have this different temperament about them. They're more soft-spoken, and, he was just going on. And I was just thinking, well, that's kind of racist. It was what I was thinking in my head, I'm like, that's not true. And it's not, because, there are a lot of rambunctious Asian kids out there. It's like, it doesn't matter. But yet at the same time, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm realizing that because they have grown up in this culture of our family, of whatever that is, whatever cultures are brewing here, and being around his parents and my parents, like they have a certain temperament where they don't see themselves fitting in the community we're in. And
even the way they play.
Even the way
Meaning what?
Like, for example, just yesterday, one of our kids was saying, at church, they just, chucked the ball at my head. And I'm like, okay, they play rough. A lot of those kids do. And, they don't.
Okay.
And so they hold themselves back from hurting the other person. Whereas at church, it's like they're used to playing rough. And so they're getting their feelings hurt because it seems like they're purposely trying to hurt them.
Oh, okay. Just by the way they play.
It's just the way they play. And then I used to, because there is something about certain Asian cultures where there is a holding back. You never give too much of. You never want to be too expressive. That's why it's that whole praying passionately thing. It's like it's all God because. For Korean culture, you don't want to expose too much of yourself. There's always that
reserved part of you.
And that's carried on over to us, then carries on over to our kids.
Right.
But when they don't see other kids who've grown up in that kind of like setting, then it's just like they feel so out of place. You know, that's just one example. But I'm starting to see that, you know, like more and more. And I'm like, Lord, you know, like, wow, this is hard.
Right.
This is hard. You know, having different cultures come together, you know, we would think that, oh, it should be as simple as, because I hear it, you know, when you're serving God, when you're doing kingdom work, it, you know, it breaks through everything. But no, so much tension comes with it because people are coming with so much pain and hurts and isolation and just not being accepted. You know, there's a lot going on there, and I feel like until people kind of tiptoe around the topic of race and culture, and nobody wants to talk about reconciliation. You know, what that looks like for different cultural groups.
Like, let me ask you this, like, even within the church, right, knowing who Jesus is and what he's called us to, you said people can easily just tiptoe around the topic. What is it in our humanity you think that keeps us from actually having the conversation, right? If you've experienced people tiptoeing around it, what do you think are the barriers that keep us from maybe addressing the hard things in the room?
I would say guilt. One thing is guilt, because the people I've faced when this topic was brought up, they put up a shield. They put up a shield and they're like, yeah, but you know, that's not me. This is not what. And then it's kind of weird. I don't know how to describe it, other than a shield. They're like being defensive when that's not my point. My point was, this is what happened.
Right. So you just mean by like, let me give you an example. Like, would that be a context where like you share your story with me, and then you're saying I might come back defensive, sort of like you're just saying I'm just sharing with you what happened, and I might come back defensive of whatever, saying, oh, I didn't do that.
Saying at certain times saying that I was wrong in the way I felt. It probably wasn't like that.
Oh, so like discounting your experience.
Pretty much.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But then it seems like they feel like they're being discounted, and we're coming from the approach of you're missing the whole picture. We're talking about a minority group that's being discounted. You know, everybody's been discounted somewhere. You know, but when we're talking about like going back to just social injustice and inequality, we're talking about a minority group or minority groups who are daily being discounted. So we're not talking about you feeling discounted when you got privilege. We're talking about groups of people who will never know what it feels like to be privileged, you know, and then, so it's this defense mechanism, but what about me? But that's not what God teaches us. It's not about me.
So let me ask you this, okay, given like the reality of what you're describing, okay, so the injustice that you're describing, like you said, myself as a person of privilege might not be, cannot connect to what you're describing came from a minority people group, right? So that might be where the gap is, right? You might share your experience and then I can come back defensive. So let me ask you this then, what would it take, okay, you said you experienced in that urban ministry something that looked very kingdom to you. Given the reality of defensiveness and the reality of, let's say, a bunch of minority groups in a church, what would it take for a church culture or a church community to be able to foster an environment where what you're describing doesn't happen, or at least is pursued differently, where you don't have to walk in feeling like your story is going to be discounted? What would it take for a church to take steps in that direction?
I would have to say, because the differences between cultures are beautiful, you know. So what one culture does and another culture doesn't do, the differences are beautiful. Being able to accept those differences, not saying that we're all one and we all act alike, we all think alike, we all talk alike. Not doing that, and being okay with the fact that we're different, and being okay with the fact that people are coming from totally different backgrounds. Where shaking hands in one culture might be the norm, whereas touching somebody, it's like, no, you can't do that in another culture. I think if different churches were able to come together and pray for one another and serve one another, I think that would bridge a lot of the gap.
Yeah.
She's still pondering.
Well,
Yeah.
no, it's like I'm trying to think like what makes that church distinct in comparison to the other churches that we're talking about, like the church we're at right now, Korean churches we grew up in. There was a strong sense of this is the ideology that we believe in. This is like the common ideology.
Okay.
And it didn't seem like there was a biblical basis for it. And it has nothing to do with like, oh, this church is a white church. Like you'll see that in churches where it's like first generation Korean. It's like, oh, this is our ideology.
Right.
But it's almost as if they seem to find like the Bible backs it up or supports it.
Okay.
Where it really doesn't.
Right.
You know, they're just picking and choosing things from the Bible to make it so that, and sometimes it's very apparent the Bible doesn't back it up, but it doesn't matter. That's still their ideology.
Okay.
You know, that is, and so if you don't conform to that, or if you don't somehow assimilate to that, there's this unwelcoming feeling.
Okay.
Whether they may not be unwelcoming, it's just how you feel, because
Right.
you're like, well, I don't fit into that.
Right.
I don't believe the same thing there. And I'm reflecting upon the urban ministry, and there's no central ideology there. There's just the Word of God that takes
Yeah.
precedence over everything.
Okay.
You know what I mean? There's no political view.
Right.
There's just an understanding that there is social injustice here,
Yeah.
and Jesus was for social justice, so we're for social justice. You
Yeah.
know, like what Jesus did, we're gonna do. You know, and there wasn't this sense of superiority that was sensed in that kind of atmosphere. Whereas
Okay.
the other places, there's an air of superiority
Right.
that comes with privilege,
Okay.
if that makes sense
Yeah.
at all.
So let me ask you this, maybe to kind of round this out, one final question. So when you dream about a church that your boys can grow up in, let's say for a moment you were going to speak into the leadership of that community, and to say one thing to the leadership of that local community, where you would be able to speak into them the things you long for your boys, that they would grow up in a community where both they're Cuban, they're Korean, any other ethnicity would be welcomed, not only welcomed, but fostered, right? And celebrated, as you said, Tony, like the diversity of God would be celebrated. What would you say to church leadership if you were going to say, this is what we long for to see for our boys, this is the kind of community we want to see our boys grow up in? What would be one thing that you'd want to speak to a team leading a community?
Love. Love the person. And it's kind of weird to say this, but love the person for their flaws. Because God could change those flaws. People can't, but God, when Jesus came, He loved the prostitute. He loved the tax collector. He loved the down and out. He loved the crippled, the leper. And He even loved the Pharisees who were willing to drop their guard down and receive Him. The centurion. It didn't matter who he faced. It didn't matter what race. Samaritan, doesn't matter. Whoever he faced, whether they're high class, low class, money, no money, Jewish or not Jewish, He approached them in love, saw their flaws, loved them for it. Changing their flaws comes later. So don't focus on how people are different or how people are not Christian. Love them for their differences and love them for how much they can grow in God.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Jenn, what about for you?
I don't know, that's a hard question.
Let me reframe it, because you've got such a prophetic gifting. Instead of what would Gen 4 say to a community, what would you say be a prophetic word the Lord would say to a community? You might connect with that quicker. Like, what is his heart?
To see people. God's heart is for everyone to be seen. And I don't feel like people are seen. It's almost like you take this beautiful picture that was drawn and it's this masterpiece, and you decide to hide specific spots of it because it doesn't agree with your style of artwork. You know, and that's how people are. God has so creatively made cultural groups and languages and dances, and there's so much to be seen. And I feel like people are deliberately not seen because it brings to mind and to heart too many issues to wrestle with God. And I think God wants people to wrestle with those issues. I think he wants people to come on their knees in repentance. And that means letting go of your pride, and I don't think people want to do that. And I think we'd have more of a kingdom ministry if every time someone walks into that church room, they are seen for exactly who God made them to be, and stop tiptoeing around, avoiding the full picture, because that full picture comes with so much. So much good, but so much heaviness also that needs to be dealt with. And, you know, it's kind of one of those things, well, if we don't talk about it, maybe it'll go away. You know, and it does. The people go away. And when the people go away, you get left with just a population of people that doesn't reflect kingdom. You get left with a group of people who just all have a one-sided view. All similar feelings, and really you've just taken the creativity of God out of that room. You know, and so I really feel like God's heart is like, I want you to see my people because they're beautiful. They are beautiful.
That's awesome.
I don't know if that answered your question.
That was exactly what it was supposed to be.
Okay.
So yeah, you guys, thank you. I appreciate you sharing your story and just being vulnerable and letting us learn from what God's done with you. So thank you guys for doing this.
It was a good learning experience for us too.
Wow, you got a beautiful story. People need to hear it. So thank you.
Thank you guys.
All right, everybody. Well, until the next conversation, grace and peace.